readers,
reviewers,
countrymen,
lend us your ears. Hello and welcome back to the channel. I am Will and this is my brother Ed, and of course we are here today to talk about what we read during the month of January. How did we kick off 2023 reading wise? So Ed, how did you kick it off? How many books did you read?
I read 7 and I'm in the middle of 1, so a pretty good month, much better than the last few months definitely, and yeah, my reading was really exciting.
Very nice. And I read 6 and I'm about halfway through another, so a bit behind you, but good reading months for January, considering how busy we were as well, because of course it's a new setup. Hopefully you watched Ed's bookshelf tour video where we did this whole setup and then gave you a tour through some of the shelves. There's still a few books that we can't find.
No, I did find them in the end.
Oh, you found them?
Admittedly, they weren't on your shelf and they were in a box in one of my rooms.
Brilliant. And so you will be shuffling the shelves around every now and then, won't you? Because there's a few gaps that you need to fill and stuff like that.
We like gaps.
More book buying. But yeah, so it's been a busy January, but we are here today to talk about what we read in January. Please do let us know how your January reading was and what you're currently reading. But without any further ado, let's kick it off. Ed, what did you read in January?
First thing I read was a manga, and this is Berserk, and I read this because of the recommendation by Daniel B. Green, the Goblin King, and I decided, it's upside down, I decided to read this because it just sounds up my street really. Obviously, the artwork is absolutely fantastic, I love the artwork, and it's meant to be kind of a dark manga as well. I read Vagabond, and I really enjoyed that, and this is kind of a similar kin to it, so it was right up my street. I really enjoyed what I read. Lots of people say that the first volume is the weakest arc really, so if I'm enjoying it now then I will grow on to love it, which is really exciting. I definitely feel that this is going to be an iconic series, and I'm really not surprised at the amount of love that it does get on BookTube and in the world as well. So I'm definitely going to be reading much more manga this year, and Berserk was a great start.
Very nice, Ed. I definitely need to read some manga. I've never read any before. But first up, I read a book called The Passenger by Cormac McCarthy. So it wasn't a happy start to 2023, but this was brilliant. It's one of those that I think, hearing a lot of people's opinions on Cormac McCarthy's latest books, is either you love them or hate them kind of thing. Yeah. Whereas I think The Road is a lot more accessible to a wider audience. Yeah. Whereas this is a bit more similar to Blood Meridian in the sense that people either love it or hate it. Not the actual content. I'd say that from what I've read by Cormac McCarthy, it's most similar to No Country for Old Men. But at the same time, it's also very different because it's a bit more intimate. There's a little bit more heart.
Is it a thriller?
Which is strange. There's little thriller aspects, but it doesn't really, it's genre defying really, where there's little elements of so many different genres. And I thought it was brilliant. It particularly focuses on the relationship between love, loss and regret, and how that can really impact your life. And your choices and your everyday decisions. But yeah, the Passenger I thought was a brilliant read. Cormac McCarthy, really, as I said, it is a bit more intimate story, but it's still got his kind of classic McCarthy-ness, where it's very stripped back, but little elements of beautiful language with fantastic imagery, and looking kind of the idea of manifest destiny, about the meaning of life, and powerful ideas and things like that.
Nice.
Very nice.
I look forward to reading The Passenger. I love Cormac McCarthy. He's one of my favourite authors, so that's going to be really cool. I want to read Suttree first. I promise I'll read that first. And then I'll get to The Passenger and Stella Maris. So, it is the reread of Red Rising kicking off. Mike's Book Reviews has been talking about this on his channel as well, doing a read-along of Red Rising, and I thought I would jump on the bandwagon because Lightbringer is coming out sometime this year. I can't quite remember, but I think it's around the middle of the year. Or September-ish, can't remember now. I'm not even going to guess. It could be August, it could be after, it could be before, who knows. But Pierce Brown, Red Rising, book 1 of the Red Rising saga, and it is a rump of a read. It's a sci-fi, but I consider it to be fantasy, really. There's not too many sci-fi elements until book 2 and 3, which come into play a lot more. But Darrow is a red, and he's part of the red caste, so they're the miners, the workers on Mars. And people are kind of subjugated into their own different roles based on the colour of the family that they're born into. So the golds are at the top, reds are pretty low down, and then lots of other colours in between. They all have different professions. And then one day he is kind of sparking a one-man revolution, and he goes on to a journey to try and infiltrate the golds. And it is a fantastic journey. There is a big element that is very Hunger Games-ish. That is not a bad thing because I absolutely love that premise. A battle royale, sign me up. And Pierce Brown's writing is so easy to access, and he's got a very vivid way of writing, and I love the way that Darrow grows as a character. I mean, the plot points here are just perfect, aren't they? Because Darrow has so much characterization, and so much happens in this small novel, but you never feel like there's no depth. You feel like there is really a lot of depth to the characters, and you know that Pierce Brown is an architect. I feel you know from book one that he's an architect. You just feel it because of the things that are coming towards the the later books of the series. So I love this. It was way better on a reread.
That's what I was going to ask.
I completely forgot how good it was, because I'm always saying Golden Sun is my favourite of the trilogy. But Red Rising really took me by surprise, even though I'd read it before. All these different things that happened, and it kind of made, lots of nods to the later books as well. Easter eggs that you'll pick up here if you've read the rest of the series as well. So it's well worth a reread.
I love it when little bits are kind of planted in previous books, and so when you go back and reread, you can see where they were. It's not just a surprise because it's never mentioned. And
it's so good seeing, meeting Severo for the first time again and knowing what an important character he grows into later on in the series. So yeah, I loved it, and I can't wait to read Golden Sun next month.
Very nice. And next up I have Mayflies by Andrew O'Hagan. So I recently watched the adaptation of 2-part series, and it was brilliant. It's about some friends in the 1980s, and then they go to a festival which kind of really summarises their childhood, what's important to them, their friendship, and those bonds that really tie them. And then it jumps 30 years ahead, and one of these friends has news for the other, and that's that. And it is a very powerful story about friendship, as I said, but also about the idea of what makes you tick, and it's how important it is to keep true to yourself, really, and explore what you find enjoyable and what means so much to you. And there's a lot of about kind of the creative arts, about music and writing and reading and all those sort of things, and the influences they have on you as well. It's very intertextual as well, a lot of references to kind of pop culture and different books and writings, because they're geeks in this. And
what
so
would you compare it to? Have you got any comparisons?
Well, I've not read it, but people have said this is like it is quite different, but it's got elements like A Little Life, in the sense that it's some friends and it's over a wide period of time. It can be soul destroying as well, but it's very short, very powerful, very impactful, but really easy to read. And the opening chapter, I think, is one of the greatest written chapters I've ever read.
Really?
So yeah, very different from what I usually read, but absolutely loved it.
Yeah, you've really signed me up for that now, Will. I think I'm really excited to check that out at some point in the future. This book, Outlawed by Anna North, is a book I was really excited to read. You know me, I love a Western. I thought, what better way to kick off the year with a feminist Western, and turning typical Western tropes onto their head and really focusing on females. So yeah, great premise, and it has this. So this book has kind of a Young Guns vibe. The main character is growing up in a town where, if you are a barren woman, you are basically an outcast, and you will be called a witch, and you will have to leave. And unfortunately, the main character is barren, so she has to leave, and then she goes on her own little journey. And I say it has Young Guns vibes, the 80s film. Because she kind of teams up with a group of women that are all have that in common to them. So it sounds great, but the delivery here, unfortunately, was just not for me. I think it is such a short book, it's about 260, 70 pages. It feels like there is a lack of depth, a lack of characterization, really. And, the premise sounds so good. She could have done so much more with it. I think the way that the plot unfolds, the way that she writes, the anecdotes she tells, it just didn't lend itself to the book, and I don't think it made the book stronger. The kind of anecdotes she was telling and the way that she told the story really didn't enhance it to me. She could really have done so much, showing the importance and the power of women in this time period by taking their lives into their own hands, really. But yeah, it felt a little bit like she had a bit of a tick list, and then she was just ticking it off as she was going along. So I'm really, really disappointed that I didn't love this, because I was so excited to read it. And I really, really want to read much more Westerns, many more Westerns with this kind of premise, focusing on, the female characters. If you played Red Dead Redemption, best character in that is Sadie Adler, 100%. So that kind of arc is what I really, really want to read. And this, I think maybe a more experienced or more, a better writer really would have been able. It's 11 in the morning.
Sorry, yes.
would have been able to do a lot more with this book. But I definitely give it a go because it might be your cup of tea. You might find something, you might find a golden nugget here, definitely. Because lots and lots of people love it, so it's just obviously not really, not really what I want. On the back it says, fans of Margaret Atwood and Cormac McCarthy get the Western they deserve.
Well, hopefully it clicks with other people. Sadly, it didn't click with you.
Yeah.
And one of the beauties of reading, isn't it, is that we don't just get given a list of books that everyone will enjoy and we all enjoy them. So that'd be a bit boring, wouldn't it? We all love different books. And next up, I have Unsold by Will White. This is book 1 of his very well-renowned Cradle series, and it's labelled as progression fantasy or levelling up fantasy. So it's a bit like a game where you start off at like level 0 and then you go up and up and up and you get better and better. And so I thought,
life, really.
I thought it was going to feel very formulaic. Yeah, exactly, like life. I thought it was going to feel very formulaic in a long time. Yes, it did feel... I thought it was going to feel very formulaic, but it didn't. It felt very organic and natural, and I enjoyed this far more than I was expecting, because some people are giving me warnings, you might not like the first 2 books, but read the first 3 because they're short, and you can get to that third one, and that's where it really kicks off, and it holds that tempo throughout. So, if I really enjoyed this, I feel like this is going to be a series that I love. So, I think
they're easy to read.
Very easy to read. I'd say that because it is quite short, there wasn't enough in a single book depth to the characterization. I'd say with the main character there is, but the supporting cast.
Did it feel like you were reading a video game, or did it feel
it felt like a book.
It was a book?
It felt like a book.
Yeah,
cool. Yeah. And I really loved the magic system and kind of the culture explored. And as I said, I've really enjoyed it. I think that there was a bit wanting with the depth of the surrounding cast, but because I think there's 11 books out and they're short books, so it's a bit too much to ask for to have it all in book 1. So I'm really looking forward to where this series goes, and hopefully I'll be reading book 2 in February.
And the next one for me was R. Scott Bakker. I'm never going to stop saying that. The Darkness That Comes Before. This is the first book of the Prince of Nothing trilogy. So, this was a book I was really excited, a bit apprehensive to get to as well, because it is so well renowned, so well loved or hated really in the fantasy circle. But I think many people sit in the middle. I think they're not sitting on the fence, but they like parts of it, they dislike parts of it. There is so much to get your teeth into in this book. So for the first start, I'll talk about the prose. R. Scott Baker's prose, second to none. Absolutely fantastic. Very economic, but also at times purple, but in a good way. He has an amazing way of creating these minor character moments just through the turn of a phrase. And you really, really do get a quick sense of who the people are from the very first sentence that you read for them. In that term, it reminds me of Joe Abercrombie, the way that he makes a character feel very distinct in the first few lines of their chapter. This is it's definitely inspired by a historical period of the Crusades, where one faction are going to war with another faction based on religious reasons. They're a little bit overzealous as well, and they turn it into their own way to make a gain. So I really like that. Obviously, I like history, and I love it when people use historical inspirations, because there is nothing darker than history.
Or
more real, exactly. So that premise was fantastic. The amount of characters here, there is a lot. My biggest criticism, the names. The names did feel a little bit, not silly, but they just felt too fantasy for me, if that is a thing.
Can you give an example?
No, I can't say most of them, but Anasarimimbo or something like that. When I'm reading it, and it has got a little glossary at the back, and an index of names and pronunciation guide as well. That's really helpful, but it just felt, sometimes felt like Conan, sometimes Robert E. Howard. Sometimes he has names like the Black Elephant or something. That's easier to get your tongue around.
Yeah, right.
But some names are really, really really difficult to get your tongue around. So that's a criticism I have. But I think in terms of character, it is slow. It is very detailed. There is a lot of depth to it. So if you're worried about depth, you don't have to worry about that, because there's a lot to read here. But I really, really enjoyed so much about this book. It does tackle lots of really dark themes, and not themes that I'm used to reading about, really, apart from unless you're reading Blood Meridian, that kind of thing. And I think it is a hard book for people to absolutely love because of the dark nature of it. But R. Scott Baker's writing really lending himself to these types of themes. He's obviously a very, very gifted writer, and I think in a less experienced writer's hands, maybe they wouldn't have been able to, and someone less talented maybe wouldn't have been able to hit home with the themes as hard as R. Scott Baker did. I really enjoyed the Barbarian, the Exile Barbarian, Naya's chapters. I think his were my favourite to get into because he's such a layered character. And the mix of things that happen, the plot points that happen with him as a character and the way that he progressed the plot as well were really interesting. And I love it when multiple characters were meeting up with each other, established characters, and then, it's a little bit like Joe Abercrombie, Lord of the Rings, when these POV characters meet each other. I find those the most entertaining, the most exciting. So that definitely happened here. And I will definitely be continuing with books 2 and 3. I watched Philip Chase's The Master, his review of this book, and I cannot say anything better than how he says it. So definitely go watch that review if you want to find out a bit about R. Scott Baker's The Darkness That Comes Before.
And I think Jimmy Nuts, it was, I think book 2 or 3 was his book of the year.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to reading books 2 and 3. Some people said the golden moments get fewer and fewer as you read the series. Other people say that they just get better and better. So I'm looking forward to finding out which camp I sit in.
Very nice. I was literally thinking that exact phrase. I was going to say it.
What camp?
Yeah.
Nice.
Well, which camp you were going to fall into.
Yeah.
How crazy is that?
I wouldn't fall. I would choose,
you choose, walk in and
I'd
just
walk
crouch
slowly.
down and
I
sit
could
down
sneak,
in the campfire.
couldn't I? Yeah,
you could
fit in,
sneak.
Yeah.
But anyway, next I have some historical fiction. That is A Night of Flames by Matthew Harvey. This is book 2 of The Time for Swords duology. I believe at some point it may become a trilogy, but you can read it just as a duology. Mm-hmm. And so in book 1, it's a bit of a Magnificent Seven vibe, as there is the Norse threat emerging on the English shores as they raid Lindisfarne. I know there was a raid before in England, but Lindisfarne is really recognised as that
the beginning of the Viking Age.
Pivotal moment in English history. And so that's about kind of the early threat, and then A Night of Flames carries on, same cast of characters, those who survive anyway. But we're expanding beyond the English shores. We are going into the Norse lands.
Yes.
And so it's pretty awesome. With this going on the Whale Road, and I absolutely thought this was great.
Does it follow Saxon characters?
Yes.
Okay. And it's only Saxon characters?
No.
Is it singular POV?
It is singular POV. It's a bit of a framing narrative, so it's a chronicler's tale.
Okay.
But there is a wide cast of characters there.
Nice.
So
okay.
yeah, it's not fine. But also in history, it's very hard to have characters from all different cultures and lands and make it feel organic and natural. And there's so many enmities. But he manages to find a way for these characters to be together in a way that feels realistic.
Nice.
So yeah, really great. Matthew Harvey, I've learned time and time again that he is just a very efficient and reliable author who will always supply an engaging read for me. So I think this is the 6th book I've read by him.
Nice.
And all great.
Fantastic, and I look forward to reading this series this year. I definitely will be a bit of my historical fiction TBR.
Very nice, Ed.
So, I had an Audible read also in January, and that was The Justice of Kings by Richard Swan. So, The Tyranny of Faith, book 2 of the Empire of the Wolf, I believe it's called. Empire of the Wolf trilogy, I believe it's going to be, is coming out in February. So I've just been approved with that on NetGalaxy. I'm going to be reading that as well, which will be really cool. So Justice of Kings, it's kind of a solicitous fantasy, basically, isn't it? There is a lot of lore here, and it is about the main character is kind of a PI's clerk, really, or governmental. What would you describe?
Like an assistant apprentice.
Yeah, she's an apprentice, the main character.
Oh, he's an Emperor's Justice.
An Emperor's Justice, that's it. So he's
judge,
jury, executioner most of the time. And I really love how this tale unfolds. There is a brief time at the beginning where you are obviously learning about the characters, about the world, the way that they live, and the main character Helena's her job, which was really interesting as well. I found that really interesting. A lot of this book I found interesting. And then you have the part in the middle, obviously, where they're trying to solve this mystery, because there is a big mystery and a murder mystery as well. It reads like a thriller crime.
It's awesome
meets
to see
fantasy,
isn't it?
But it was fantastic to see crime meets fantasy because of the fantastical elements. There's a little bit of necromancy, which I absolutely love that section. And then probably the final third was the strongest part of the book. I think that's probably widely regarded as a true statement.
It was
brilliant. It was fantastic. It was a roller coaster of a ride, and it really just swept you off your feet because of the way that Richard Swan set up that final climax at the beginning of the book. So exciting. I absolutely loved it, and I can't wait to read The Tyranny of Faith in February. It was definitely a hit with me, and I'm looking forward to seeing where Helena goes next.
Very nice. And I'm currently reading Tyranny of Faith, and I think if you enjoy Justice of Kings, you're really going to enjoy The Tyranny
Nice.
of Faith.
I read Patrick's review of Tyranny of Faith, and he said he really enjoyed it.
I've not seen it.
So, yeah, check
Brilliant.
it out on Goodreads.
Very nice. And next up, I have Legend by David Gemmell. I did a reread of probably his most famous work.
Nice.
This was his debut. It can be read as a standalone, can be read as a series. I recommend it being the first book people read by David Gemmell. And yeah, I've got a review over on my channel. Well, I prefer the Regante, but if you want to see what David Gemmell's all about, I think Legend is a brilliant book for that. And so yeah, there is a review over on my channel, William Gwynn, to go into my deeper thoughts, but I would recommend instead watching Philip Chase's Legend review, because as we always say, he's far more insightful and manages to put it into words his thoughts far better than we
and he's
can hope to.
The king of thumbnails. Oh, I think your thumbnail was pretty good as well. With the
It did take me about an hour to do that. I think Philip was probably much more economic than me as well with the thumbnails. But some of his thumbnails are absolutely brilliant. His Vinland Saga ones with Murphy Napier. When he had the blonde hair, absolutely brilliant.
He suits every hairstyle, doesn't he?
He does.
And he suits all types of armor.
And the goatee,
well.
I think it was a goatee, Yeah, so maybe we'll see Philip with a goatee at some point very soon.
Yeah.
But anyway,
chin strap.
Legend is one of those books that I loved as a child, a very formative read. So there is an element of nerves returning to it, thinking, is it going to live up to these expectations and this kind of mythological status that's built up in my mind? But I'm glad to say that it really did, where David Gemmell really takes kind of those traditional fantasy vibes and adds a modern twist with heroes who are heavily flawed. And I absolutely love that. And so yeah, Legend, great read. And really enjoyed it again.
And the next one for me was another Mark Lawrence book, and I've read the first 6 books Mark Lawrence wrote, and now I'm on to book 7, which is Red Sister, book 1 of the Book of the Ancestor trilogy. So this book is probably one of the best character goes to school fantasy books that I've read. Nona is a fantastic character. She has great depth. Mark Lawrence is very economic prose, but he also, like R. Scott Baker, has a way of making a turn of phrase, and it just hits home. And I'm always pausing my reading to reread phrases that Mark Lawrence has written to really feel the impact of it, because he is such a talented and unique writer. I think the plot points here, the pacing of this book was so strong. I really enjoyed Red Sister because of the way that Nona, she develops throughout the book and the characters that she meets. I think this book has the best kind of secondary cast of characters in a Mark Lawrence book that I've read so far. I absolutely love Nona's friends and her compatriots, and I really enjoyed seeing how they developed throughout the book. The ending was fantastic, and it really sets up the rest of the trilogy in a way that book ones must do, and it made me really excited to go and read the rest of the trilogy. So thank you, Will, for the recommendation. This was a book that Will said I have to read. Obviously, we choose books that the other brother must read, and this was one of his. I wonder what he will be choosing next.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Is that, I think, every single one other than the Silmarillion you've loved, haven't you?
Yes.
So, awesome. Really, I'm on a good roll here, aren't I? And we'll just ignore the Silmarillion.
What are you reading that I've recommended next?
Lonesome Dove. Yes, there was something before. But I don't remember.
I wonder.
I will remember. But the last book that I read in...
Shogun, of course.
I think I'll be reading Lonesome Dove first. Oh, stunning. But first, the last that I read in January was Crusaders by Dan Jones. And so this is non-fiction. Loved reading a lot of Dan Jones's books over the last 12 months. So some of his non-fiction, I read The Templars last year. And also his historical fiction, Essex Dogs, which is right there. And that is awesome. But the Crusades... I wonder what it's about. The Crusaders. But obviously it is about the Crusades, and it covers quite a wide period of time, and I love how it's kind of an overview, because I don't really know too much about this subject. I know maybe little bits I know quite deeply, and then the rest is just a huge gap in my knowledge. So I really enjoyed how Dan Jones presents kind of a wider scope on the political ongoings, the machinations behind the catalysts for the Crusades, and the key players in them as well. And so, yeah, it's definitely elements within that I really want to dive into further, such as he did the Templars, which is mentioned in the Crusaders, And so if you really enjoy the Crusaders, there's other books he's written which are more deep dives into certain little elements.
Yeah.
And so the Crusaders, great non-fiction. Dan Jones has a brilliant tone which makes non-fiction feel very fresh and readable.
And I don't think you have to be really interested in the Crusaders to read it and love it, because Dan Jones has such a way of writing that he makes everything funny, engaging, and interesting to read, and you really do pick out the details. Sometimes when you read a non-fiction, it's hard to actually pick out those details and, you know, be able to actually retain them, I think, sometimes, because there's so much to learn about in non-fiction books. But Dan Jones has a way of really embedding it into your mind. So yeah, even if you don't love the Crusader of that time period, then definitely give this a read, because it is an engaging read.
Definitely do. That's good advice, Ed.
So I'll quickly brisk over the next 2 or 3 reads that I have done. So number 1 was David Gemmell's The Sword in the Storm. I just reread it because I'm going to be going to be writing again very soon. And I thought this book will definitely spur me on with a little bit of inspiration, because David Gemmell's style is definitely something that I think I will incorporate into my writing. It's kind of in my DNA, I believe, the Regante, because I love it so much. Sword in the Storm is book 1 of the Regante, and is my favourite series of his. It's the only series I've read by David Gemmell, but book 1 and book 2, Midnight Falcon, are just dream of books. They're just amazing. I love the Regante because it is it's a Celtic inspired fantasy, much like Faith from the Fallen. And obviously, as you guys know, I recently read Boudica, that series by Amanda Scott, and I absolutely adored it. So Sword in the Storm is basically the fantasy version. And Conovar, the main character, is so well written. David Gemmell writes heroes like none other. He is the king of flawed heroes. And even though Conover does terrible things, you are still behind him as a character. David Gemmell has a great sense of humour. He also has wonderful character moments. And there are so many things that Conover, the character, does that make him a unique and remarkable man that you cannot help but love him. And the Regante, you love the way that they live, and you want them to, beat anyone who comes onto their lands. This is Caesar's Gallic Wars, but the fantasy version.
Very nicely put, Ed. And what do you have last up?
I have a couple more. I have Storm Dancer by Jay Kristoff. I was really excited to read this because it is Japanese-inspired fantasy, 100%, and it is a steampunk fantasy as well. And I love the way that Jay Kristoff incorporated those two things into a very unique world. And his world building was top tier. Yukiko, the main character, was a strong female, and she was a brilliant leading character. She really set the pace of the novel. She really was her own person. And I love the found family aspect of this book. It was so much fun to read. And I love the plot points. I absolutely love the way that he writes action and he uses that to enhance the plot as well. And the character Boru was such a brilliant character. At the beginning I was terrified of him, and towards the end I absolutely adored him, and I really, really didn't want anything bad to happen to him or many of the other characters. Jay Kristoff writes multi-POV characters so well, and he really has them interact with each other at a level that is just top tier. You can tell that he's a fantastic writer. And I love the way that he does write. Some of the features of this is, there are kind of YA resemblances, which is not a bad thing for me, but just know that when you go into reading it. But he also has many adult themes as well. So I really like that he encompasses so many different readers, and that's probably why he's such a popular writer.
Yeah, I love Empire of the Vampire. Looking forward to book 2, and definitely need to read more by Jay Kristoff.
And hey, we all like a bit of vampire smut sometimes, don't we? But it's much more than just that, I think. Much more. And I'm currently reading The Night Watchman by Louise Erdrich. I'm about 30 pages into it, so not many at the moment. But I'm really enjoying the way that she writes. It's set in a 1950s Chippewa reservation in North America. And the main characters are all living on this reservation. And I just love the way that she's writing about how their lives go about. It has kind of Stephen King vibes at the moment, of the way she's incorporating all the different characters in this town, in this region. But I'm sure it's going to be very, very different to Stephen King's writing by the end. And I've heard that she's a fantastic writer and someone that is, definitely someone to keep your eye on, and definitely read as many of her books as possible, because she is so accomplished. And it seems like every single one of her books just gets rave reviews, so she has a fantastic fan base as well, and I'm sure for a very good reason.
Very nice. I had a lot that I want to read there, but everyone, thank you so much for watching. This is the books that we read in January. I was happy with what I read in January. We were very busy, so I'm happy with what we got through.
Me too.
And let us know what you read in January. How has your 2023 reading kicked off? Let us know if you've read any of these. Do you know any books that are similar that we may want to try out?
We need more recommendations.
We always love and
Space on the
appreciate
shelves
your
to fill.
recommendations in the
Yes, we
comments.
do.
And as I said, we have space. So everyone, thank you so much for watching. Stay safe. Truth and courage.
Truth and Courage from the Brothers Gwyn.
The Brothers Gwyn.